I'm Mike Doran. I am the director of the Center for Peace and Security in the Middle East and a senior fellow at the Hudson Institute. And I'm joined today by my fellow senior fellows at the Hudson Institute, Can Kasapoğlu and Jonathan Schachter. And we're here to talk to you about the very grim events in Israel yesterday. We are recording this on Sunday afternoon. And of course, you're all aware that yesterday, hundreds of Hamas terrorists broke through two fences and invaded Israel. They have killed hundreds of people. I think the number at the time of this airing is up over 600. They have wounded over 1,000. They met with very little military opposition under the cover of a barrage of rocket fire. They came across into Israel by foot, by motorcycle, by vehicle, and by paraglider. They took over settlements, and they took over towns, and they took over military installations. They remained there for many, many hours. In fact, at the time of the airing today on Sunday, I think that there are still some terrorist groups that are still operating on Israeli soil. Families were held hostage in their homes for many hours. A rave, a nature rave, an all-night dance party near Gaza was attacked. People were slaughtered. Girls were raped next to the friends who had just been slaughtered. Absolutely horrific images, many of which have been the Israeli public has been shielded from. This is the worst day in the history of the IDF probably ever, but certainly since the second and third day of the Yom Kippur War in 1973. Here to help me understand this, as I said, are my two colleagues, and let's start with you, John. Can you please just give us your best military intelligence assessment? How did Israel, which has a vaunted high-tech military, one of the best intelligence services in the world, how did it get caught by surprise like this?
Thanks, Mike. Let's start with an overview of the red team assessment here. The bottom line is what we are facing is a very sophisticated operational planning by Hamas. Which suggests that operational planning was involved more than Hamas, given the complexity of operations. It all started with taking out observation towers surrounding the Gaza Strip and the control areas and the control points. The interesting thing is Hamas took out all these observation towers by drone warfare assets. And they had full information superiority at the time when they blacked out all these information towers over the IDF. Then the operation started in a way that you wouldn't easily, or the Israeli military intelligence wouldn't easily make a diagnosis of that, because it incorporated a very large, massive rocket barrage and paragliders going deep inside the Israeli territory. So if you were in the 0 hour or what happened, and if you were in the shoes of an Israeli military intelligence officer, probably you wouldn't develop a quick and thorough understanding as to how to categorize. Is it a rocket attack? Is it a drone attack? Or is it some commando raid by elite Hamas militancy with paragliders, but it was orchestrated? The thing is, all these things, all the overture of the conflict, if you like, was done to hide the follow-on attack, and the follow-on attack was up to 1,000 Hamas personnel raiding a terrorist plot. By open source intelligence, since yesterday, I'm trying to collect all the bits and pieces of open source intelligence evidence, and what we counted up until now is 6 jump-off points in military terms, which means the staging grounds, the initial staging grounds of an offensive. At these 6 jump-off points, think it like a leftwards looking crescent.
Sorry, John, to interrupt you. When you say jump-off points, you mean jump-off points from within Gaza going out, or within Israel?
The jump-off points at ground zero, that you are out of Gaza, inside Israel, but like a few meters behind, this is Gaza. So,
So
you know,
six breaches in the fence.
at least,
Yeah.
and they are all coordinated, by the way. So it is like a 15 kilometers long leftwards looking crescent with Erez checkpoint in the north and the Nahal Oz military base in the south. I suggest like all our audience right now take a very quick glance at the map to understand the situation. And we saw that the Hamas teams penetrated very fast in a very blitz fashion deep inside the Israeli territory. One thing to understand here is that as to the ground operations phase of the terrorist plot, we saw two overlapping operations run by two categorically different teams. One was about holding territory, contemporarily occupying Israeli southern territory, holding the ground, and forcing the IDF and the Israeli security forces into a really bloody, really troublesome urban warfare situation. But when this was happening and all the paragliders were raiding deep and the rocket barrage was continuing, there was a second effort by Hamas, very deliberate, and I would say in a notorious fashion. Like the professionalism was very very high, again in a notorious fashion, that they conducted systematic kidnapping activity. I mean, like there were some death squads who went in to massacre Israeli population, but there were some other squads who deliberately and systematically kidnapped Israeli citizens, and they established like a shuttle all the way back and forth between the Israeli territory and the Gaza Strip, taking hostage innocent civilians and the party that the event that you mentioned, and bringing them all the way back to Gaza. So this is the operation in a nutshell. We saw this is the strategic level. Boiling down to the tactical level, we saw some really interesting things, again, suggesting Iranian Revolutionary Guard's involvement. For instance, quadcopter drones carrying tandem charge RPGs for penetrating the armor. And they were attacking the Israeli Merkava for tanks and heavy armored platforms, other heavy armored platforms, by following a perpendicular angle to catch the tank off guard at a place that it is most vulnerable. So this tactical approach to the conflict, like equipping quadcopter drones with tandem charge warhead carrying RPGs, and knowing exactly how to attack a state-of-the-art Israeli main battle tank, this goes not only in the strategic planning phase, but also in the tactical execution phase of the attack. This goes well beyond the capabilities of a simple paramilitary organization in the Middle East.
So let me just repeat back to you what I heard in a summary form. I heard you say that they, first of all, blinded the Israelis with the sort of, I guess it would be, I don't exactly understand how the Israeli early warning system is set up, but they have a number of posts with sensors on them, and they destroyed those to blind the first line of electronic defense. And then they combined together a number of different kinds of ways of breaching, mechanisms for breaching the fence, the paragliders, the people on the foot, people on vehicle, and so on, and combined with a rocket barrage, which confused the analysts on the other side, whoever the soldiers are behind the computer screens, and they're looking at all the different images they have. They don't know how to decide. They don't know how to understand exactly what they're dealing with in this first instance, and
exactly.
that gave the Israelis, the Hamas, the element of surprise. And then you're saying that there were these teams that are specialized in murder, specialized in kidnapping, and they had these tasks were set up where these are tasks that they trained for ahead of time, and this was integrated in a systematic fashion. And they're telling me that they have weaponry and tactics that they clearly got from the Iranians. So the whole thing together says this is a very sophisticated strategic brain behind this. There's an understanding of the Israeli, there's a penetration of the Israeli systems, There's techniques for overcoming them. We've never seen anything like this by Hamas before. And your analysis, I'm putting words in your mouth, but I think this is where you led, is that there has to be a state actor behind this. This wasn't just some clever guy in Hamas who came up with this. There's a state actor, most likely Iran, that is helping coordinate all this and develop the tactics. Is that what you're saying?
That's in a nutshell what I'm saying, with two additions. That state actor, that very state actor you are highlighting here, should be expert in drone, rocket, and missile operations, should be expert in unconventional warfare and proxy warfare at the same time, should have a clear edge in producing and employing loitering munitions, because we have seen also kamikaze drones, loitering munitions, should have a high stake and interest in kidnapping and using the hostages as political leverage, very craftily, I would say. And that actor behind that should have deep-rooted ties not only to Hamas but also Islamic Jihad, because we are always putting the entire focus on Hamas, but we should state that this was a joint Hamas-Palestinian Islamic Jihad operation.
Of course, and everyone should know, Hamas is a proxy of Iran, but the Palestinian Islamic Jihad is Iran. If Palestinian Islamic Jihad,
organic extension,
it's an extension of Iran. If Palestinian Islamic Jihad is doing something, Iran is doing it. So all of the indicators point toward Iran, and of course we have today Hamas officials giving thanks to Iran. So it's not like that's a great mystery. Okay, thank you, John. Jonathan, let's turn to you. John left out of his analysis the Israeli side of things. I think nobody in our organization understands Israel better than you. How did this happen from the Israeli point of view? Where was it, even after the initial the initial deception? Where was the Israeli military?
I think that's the big question that everyone is asking. And from what I've seen, there's been discussion of failures on multiple levels. Obviously, there's an intelligence failure, because even if those initial steps that John described succeeded in blinding or partially blinding or confusing the Israelis, like as you said, Mike, who were sitting behind the screens, there obviously isn't any sort of warning about this in advance. Certainly not in a way that leads to taking preventive or preparatory action. So again, none of us on this call knows what Israel knew or didn't know, but it seems pretty straightforward that sort of early warning was not there, which of course is getting a lot of attention, a lot of discussion, because it does come 50 years almost to the day after the Yom Kippur War, and there also, as was found afterwards by the Argonaut Commission, one of the great failures was a failure to foresee and to prepare, excuse me, in a timely way. I think the failures then go beyond just intelligence. There's also then operational failures. So Israel has spent billions of dollars over the last several years strengthening its defenses against Gaza, its walls, obviously its defenses underground, in the air, and again, I think those things have proven themselves many times, even yesterday and even today, in terms of Iron Dome and things like that. But the wall and the fencing obviously did not withstand this onslaught, and so then. And then there's the other layers. There are layers of security at in these towns and kibbutzim and military facilities. So there are layers of failures here that are going to need to be addressed, both in the intelligence level and the operational level. But I think right now, it's funny. Most of the discussion about Israel over the last better part of a year has been about the divisions in Israeli society. And I think right now you're seeing that being pushed aside. And this is the kind of situation, unprecedented though it may be, where Israelis come together. And in fact, with all of the comparisons to 1973, the more apt comparison is 1948, because it actually isn't since 1948 that you have this kind of not just threat, but also loss of life to Israeli civilians. And just to put this into perspective, you have the Second Intifada, where a little over 1,000 Israelis are killed by Hamas and Islamic Jihad and the other Palestinian factions. That takes place over the course of 5 years. And now you've got the numbers that are creeping up, into many hundreds now, and that's in a single day. So this is a shocking thing for Israel and for Israeli society. But what you're seeing right now is people coming together. The Prime Minister and Lapid and Gantz have all offered or expressed a willingness to go into an emergency government together. Whether or not that happens remains to be seen, but I think it says something, given the acrimony, but amongst the three of them. I think that that says a lot.
Can you, Jonathan, can you take us through some of the options that the Israelis have? They none of them look, as I look at it, particularly attractive, because we've had we've had many rounds of violence with Gaza, and I think the Israelis believe that they had it contained. Clearly, they don't. Now they're probably going to have to go in on the ground, at least to some extent. But what's the goal of the operation going to be? How are they going to achieve victory? How are they going to define victory? How are they going to achieve it? What's the cost going to be? Can you give us just a few thoughts about that?
Sure. I think that's the big question right now. Today, I think they took what was largely it's an important declarative and legal step in terms of the government formally declaring war. But I think the real question is exactly the one you just raised. What is the goal? How are they going to define victory? The Prime Minister gave some indication of sort of the magnitude of what he's talking about yesterday, when he said, this is not an operation. He said, this isn't another round of fighting. He said, this is a war. And so then I think there are a few options that come to mind, just off the top of my head. Is this a more limited thing? We're saying, okay, so they're going to try and strip Hamas and Islamic Jihad of their offensive capabilities, or is it going to go further than that? Is it going to be to try and destroy these organizations and destroy the leadership of these organizations and and their structures, or is this going to be a total re-entry of Israel into Gaza and taking over the administration of Gaza and the population there? Now, I don't know the answer to that question, but I think that even if we took those three as a reasonable approximation of what the spectrum of choices might be, each one of those would require the entry of forces into Gaza and doing something much more significant than has been done in the previous rounds since 2009. That would also be take more time and be more costly. And we tend to think of these previous rounds, as having been short, and most of them were. But I'll point out that in 2014, that lasted 50 days. That was they were into the 8th week when that ended. So there could be very long weeks and months ahead.
Complicating all of this, of course, is the hostages. And I don't know, Jonathan, do you know how many hostages there are approximately?
I don't know the approximate numbers. The only thing I saw just in the last couple of hours was Israel had officially said that it's over 100. Now, how much more than that, I can't say. I don't know.
Okay. So this is a completely uncharted territory. Over 100 hostages. Some significant number of which are Americans and foreigners. So we're going to have discussions about by the very nature of it, that we're going to have involvement of foreign governments advising Israel, giving Israel counsel as it goes along about its war aims, about its tactics, and so on. That would happen anyway, but there's going to be this added special element of the welfare of foreign nationals. John, why don't you just give us a little bit of sense of the military challenges that Israel faces in general, but especially with regard to this hostage question?
So we should zoom out and then zoom in gradually. I think the main intelligence mistake here would be thinking such an operation within the very limited framework of an Israel, Hamas plus Islamic Jihad showdown. It can easily, the planners of this plot against Israel most probably anticipated a massive, large-scale Israeli response that could potentially involve a land incursion. Given the sophistication of military planning behind the plot, would speak for itself. We shouldn't exclude any scenario that involves the Lebanese Hezbollah involvement, seeing an opportunity and capitalizing on an opportunity, because we know that geopolitically, since its foundation, the nightmare military scenario for the state of Israel has always been a multi-front war. And being cornered in a multi-front war against the Lebanese Hezbollah and Hamas would be even worse than what I tried to depict up until now. So we have to keep an eye on the north and the Lebanese Hezbollah movements and concentrations. Today, for instance, a drone dispatched by the Lebanese Hezbollah from southern Lebanon entered the Israeli airspace, and the Israeli Patriot batteries had to engage. Well, this could well be, testing the reaction times and limits and patterns. So this is, I think, the first caveat to keep in mind. The second problem is
again, sorry to interrupt you again, John, but just to remind our viewers that we're taping this on the afternoon of the Sunday, the 8th.
We know that Nasrallah very recently threatened Israel by a multi-front war, and it is not beyond imagination that Lebanese Hezbollah and Iran would see an historic opportunity to see that the Israeli ground forces are engaged in an open-ended military endeavor in the Gaza Strip. The second problem, and even if the Netanyahu government manages to keep it between Hamas, Islamic Jihad, and the Israeli Defense Forces, the character of the operation will be a major obstacle, deciding on the character of the operation. If it's going to be a hostage rescue operation, if it's going to be a punitive operation, if it's going to be about seriously crippling Hamas operational capabilities, so that in the next 10, 15 years, Hamas and Islamic Jihad will not be able to carry out such magnitude of operations. All these categories, easier said than done, would necessitate different force generation, which means different pickup of the right units. Every single unit is suitable for a different and very distinctive military objective. And we call that force generation. All these kind of different operational options come with different force generation requirements, the type of units that you would need to execute those missions, different weapon systems, different calculus on collateral damage, different calculus as to minimizing casualties, and different ways of warfighting and different battle plans. So I think the main problem here, and again, going beyond the tactical and operational military calculus, is the political decision and the political framework behind such a military operation to define that military operation, even before defining the theory of victory. What you are going into and what kind of operation is that? If the Netanyahu government decides for doing, and tries to pull a rabbit from the hat and tries to miraculously conduct a punitive operation, a crippling operation on critical capabilities of Hamas and Islamic Jihad, and in the meantime rescuing hostages, it means that it has to dispatch a special forces combat search and rescue mission in tandem with a large-scale multi-brigade level land incursion to hold territory. This will be really important. And also a standoff, long-range strike deterrent mission to pinpointly take out the critical infrastructure, which enables the Hamas and Islamic Jihad military prowess. And while doing that, avoiding collateral damage and also avoid any harm to the hostages. I think the very problem, and I'm going to wrap up and end here. I think the main dilemma here is action is needed, and any kind of action is very risky, and any kind of action's political framework is very murky. So, so Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu right now is in a place that no other prime minister or president would like to be, unfortunately.
Now, Jonathan, when John just said the political context is murky, I'm not sure if he was referring to the domestic political context or the international context. But why don't we tee off that statement and get your reaction? Do you, in your assessment, does he have the political backing at home, given all the fragmentation, to see a very complex and difficult operation through to the end? And what about the international support?
So first of all, I think political contexts are always murky, but I think we can divide that into two. If we look domestically, I think right now there's broad support for Israel doing what needs to be done. This thing is still, we're only in the second day of this, and the stuff inside Israel is still going on. They're still searching for and fighting with Hamas terrorists inside Israel, and still trying to put numbers on the hostages. And so my point is, this is still something that's very much coming together, and I think there's broad support for doing something about it. I think the decisions that are going to have to be made, as John correctly pointed out, are very hard decisions, and I think that's a big part of why they're talking about having an emergency government, so that there's as broad a political consensus as possible within Israel. I think the much greater challenge is going to be international. Right now, in the first 24 hours, the political and diplomatic support that you've seen from the United States, from the President and Secretary of Defense, and in Congress, and also in Europe, has been very encouraging and very positive. The question is how long is that going to last? And we've seen, again, using previous rounds of fighting with the terrorist forces in Gaza as an example, we've seen that there's often initial support for Israel's right to defend itself, and everybody says the right things, and then as the costs of these rounds begin to accumulate and to be broadcast, the international community tends to lose its stomach for it, and then start applying pressure on Israel to wrap things up quickly. And I think these two things are sort of the Israeli goals and the tendency to put pressure on Israel to wrap things up are in as stark contradiction right now as I've ever seen, because you have Israel and the prime minister saying explicitly that this is going to take a long time, but you, on the other hand, the time is going to, the clock is already in some ways ticking. I heard a discussion on one of the major news networks yesterday where the announcer was talking about Israel's provocation that led to this. And the guy said, so was this provocation, was it last week? Was it last month? Was it 5 years ago? Was it 50 years ago? Was it 75 years ago? So here you have, already on the news, sort of the Israel's very existence being a provocation that leads to Israeli civilians being kidnapped and murdered today. I mean, the whole idea of it is
Well, I mean,
crazy, but it's part of the effort to to delegitimize Israel and to take away its right to defend itself, which has been the plan all along.
This use of hostages and terrorizing civilian population through social media. I've never seen anything like it before. I mean, we've seen the beheading videos of ISIS and things like that, or some of the videos that come out of some terrorist attacks, but I've never seen anything like the video of the little boy being taunted by other little boys, by the families. You know, one video, a family had their daughter shot in front of them, and then they were being held hostage in their home. And Hamas is parading all of this on social media proudly. We're going to see now they have 100 or more hostages, including Americans. We're going to see much more of this, and it's going to have an impact on global public opinion, and not necessarily the impact that we might think.
No,
Let me,
you know, this in some ways. I'm sorry, Mike. You know, in some
Go ahead.
ways, this is a stark reminder of you know, sort of the earlier days of the Palestinian national movement, when you saw, you know, PLO attacks in schools and apartment buildings, and of course you remember Ma'alot in 1974,
right?
And things like that, where, you know, Israelis, you know, sort of Palestinians have been the Palestinian movements have been you know, murdering and kidnapping Israeli civilians in the name of human rights for a very long time, and you know, and in many ways, pioneered.
And the tactic works. Let me highlight for you. I'm gonna step out of my role as moderator here, and I'm gonna interview myself about the Iranian role in all of this, and because I think that Iran. I agree with Can Kasapoğlu's analysis at the beginning that there's a guiding hand behind all of this, and it is Iran. And I think Iran has already scored some very, very significant victories here, just on the basis of these opening days. And I think they are poised to score more victories if we don't, if we, the United States, don't reassess our policy. So what victories have they scored? They have all but destroyed, I think, the Saudi-Israeli rapprochement, or they at least have put it on hold. That was a real problem for them, the Saudi-Israeli normalization. They don't want to see the Abraham Accords expanded. They don't want to see Israel having normal relations with the Gulf states, and they certainly don't want to see it having increased military cooperation with the Gulf states. And they drove a wedge into that process. They have changed the balance inside Palestinian politics between Hamas and Fatah, which Fatah led by Abu Mazen, who is, for actuarial reasons, near retirement, and there's a political vacuum around him, and Hamas wants to fill that vacuum and become the dominant player in the PLO and in Palestinian politics in general. This is helping, and this will help Hamas, and this will help Iran. As I mentioned, Iran wants to destroy the Abraham Accords, and it wants to undermine the American alliance system and raise up the militant Palestinian voice within the Palestinian arena, and it has succeeded in all of that. And as this war goes on in Gaza, and there has to be, I don't see how there's not a ground incursion into Gaza of some significant extent, whether it's going to be all the way a complete occupation, or just occupation of the north of the Strip, and then incursions in southward from there. I don't know, but I can't see, given the nature of the threat and the nature of the provocation, I can't see that any Israeli government can avoid getting involved on the ground in Gaza, and that is going to further inflame relations between Israel and just about every Arab and Islamic country. I think the only country that has really come out unequivocally supportive of Israel has been Morocco, And we're going to, you know, if we're concerned that American support for Israel is going to flag over time, we can rest assured that the feeling in the Islamic world is going to become embittered, and we can see there's a very sophisticated social media and media propaganda network working to make sure that happens. My final point here is about American strategy. American strategy has inadvertently created or inadvertently rewarded this kind of activity by Iran, by releasing money to Iran, by turning Iran into a legitimate interlocutor about the regional balance, by doing nothing to impede the development of the conventional disruptive military capabilities that Iran has. All of this has just given Iran encouragement to play this role of regional disruptor. The clear desire of the Biden administration to raise the Palestinian question back up and make it a top issue on the agenda has encouraged Hamas to carry out acts of violence, because it knows that when there is unrest, the United States will step in and chip away at Israel. So we really need an American policy that understands the role that Iran is playing as the coordinator of all of the coordinator, facilitator, and strengthener. I don't know if that's the right word, of all of the elements that are trying to undermine the American order in the region. I think that this will help Israel get the international backing it needs in order to do whatever it decides it needs to do in Gaza. But it's also very important in terms of preventing the scenario that Can Kasapoğlu mentioned of widening the conflict to Lebanese Hezbollah or to any of the other Iranian proxies. If Iran understands that things that it holds dear are in danger from the United States, and the United States will either do it itself or strengthen elements in the region, including Israel, who can hold at risk things that Iran holds dear. If that happens, then we have a much better chance of containing this to Gaza and giving the Israelis the time and the resources that they need to come out of this victorious. I think it's very important for the United States that Israel be victorious. And again, I'm not going to define victory. It's going to be up to Prime Minister Netanyahu and his government to define what victory is. But it's very important to the United States that they be seen to be victorious, because if this kind of terrorist outrages are seen to deliver to Hamas and to Iran victories, then we are just inviting more and more of the same, and it's going to be sooner or later it's going to end up involving American forces directly. So that was a big soliloquy. Can Kasapoğlu, you got any reaction to
that? Two things, actually. The right verb defining the action after such a catastrophe would be of utmost importance. Responding to that, yeah, it is important. For the United States, assisting the Israeli military capabilities to protect and to respond, yes, from also Washington standpoint, that's important. But the most important verb of action here is understanding. I think like the first thing that would calm allies of United States and those in the Middle East who attach their national securities to United States is that President Biden goes before the cameras and he says, like, we completely understood the network and the mechanism and all the systematics behind this attack. Because the problem is, I'm sure there will be a search of military assistance to Israel right now. And I'm sure, as Jonathan said, there will be more marge de maneuver, if you say, space, freedom of space for allowing Israel what it needs to do to respond. But still the missing part, I think, is I doubt President Biden's policy team have developed a complete understanding of what happened, because this thing we are talking about right now is merely a symptom, a manifestation of the changing balance of power and changing strategic calculus in the Middle East. And unless...
Sorry, just to make sure, I want to make sure that I understand you correctly, because I have I just gave a soliloquy on Iran.
I'm gonna give you
are you with me on this? And when you say changing strategic calculus in the Middle East, you mean in Tehran and in the Middle East in general, or are you talking more specifically about Gaza, Hamas, Israel?
So back in 2019, Aramco came under attack in Saudi Arabia, and it was, again, like from an economic point of view, it was a catastrophe in the region. Talking about the attack, we defense analysts, we focused on the projectiles, the loitering munitions used in the attack, the missiles, cruise missiles, ballistic missiles, drones. What did they use, and the flight path and the launch origin of the attack, whether it came from Yemen or it came from Iraq or somewhere else. If I'm not mistaken, a Mashhad-based cleric, very close to Khamenei, Ahmed al-Molhoda, during his Friday sermon, he said people are, referring to military analysts like me, people are discussing if the attack came from Yemen or if the attack came from Iraq. He said, like, regardless of it came from Yemen, regardless of it came from Iraq or elsewhere, it came from Iran. Because he said Iran, like, and these are the Iranian words, by the way, and this comes deep from the regime. He says, like, Lebanese Hezbollah is Iran, Islamic Jihad is Iran, Hamas is Iran, Popular Mobilization Forces is Iran. And this, again, this is not a calculation or a conclusion by the Hudson Institute. This is not my own words. I'm just verbatim referring to an Iranian cleric. I think that Friday sermon, and that was a geopolitical manifestation. This is a political military statement, and this political military statement, since the Obama times, brick after brick, has become the reality of the region in the Middle East. I think without understanding it and using the word, highlighting the word, understanding it, okay?
Understanding it and holding Tehran responsible.
Without making a diagnosis, everything you do is either a cortisone shot or painkiller.
Yeah.
No systemic cure.
So, Jonathan, you can take us home now. Your final words. I'm sure you agree with me. We should be holding, we, the United States, our policy should be holding Iran responsible for this and behaving accordingly. You agree?
Yeah, I do agree. And I think even without John's, I think, very precise and very accurate analysis from the beginning of this conversation, you know, there is no Hamas and there is no Islamic Jihad, and they don't have any rocket or missile threat or any offensive military threat without Iran, right? Iran is, you know, funds, trains, supports. We know this. I would just say a couple of things. I want to say one thing about the Saudi rapprochement that you mentioned and the Abraham Accords. As you know, I tend to be more skeptical about that outcome going into this, but now I'll say something that's sort of its opposite. And I think it could be that this is that this drives a huge wedge and makes it much less likely. But I think that also depends on the outcome. And I think, as you said, I think if there is, you know, sort of a clear victory for Israel and the United States and a clear defeat for Iran and its proxies, I think that could change the calculation, not just of Saudi Arabia, but of other countries in the region as well. I completely agree with you about the Palestinian politics and the jockeying for position for, as they say, the day after Abu Mazen. There's one other Iran piece that I think is worth mentioning as we wrap up. I don't know if the Lebanese Hezbollah is going to get involved or not get involved. I think you can make convincing arguments in both directions. And even today's, I think John mentioned there was a drone incursion, and there was also a report of some mortar fire on the northern border. And the question is this Is this sort of testing the Israelis' response, or is this going through the motions to sort of show solidarity without actually getting involved? And I don't know the answer to that question. What I do know is that when Israelis talk about the possibility of Israeli military action against the nuclear program in Iran, one of the things that they are concerned about, and they have to be concerned about, is whether or not such an action would be part of the response would be large-scale attacks from Hezbollah in the north and from Hamas and Islamic Jihad in the south. And as discussion increases over the last couple of years about advances in the Iranian nuclear program and the possibility of Israeli action, is this a signal that this is something that Israel needs to take into consideration? That is this an act that's intended to deter Israel from taking action in Iran?
Can I jump in there?
Please.
Because I want to give my answer to that, and which is yes, 100%. And when I listed some of the benefits that have already come to Iran, this is one of them. The United States needs to understand that this action is in part an effort by Iran to protect its nuclear program from an Israeli attack, and I would say so far a successful one. And now, if Israel can actually take Hamas off the table, and I don't know that it can, or it can reduce its capabilities so severely that we're going to see nothing but quiet for the next 15 years between Israel and Gaza, well, then Iran will have failed. But it's going to do everything it can. So far, it's dealt a very severe blow to Israel, and it's going to do everything it can as this conflict expands into Gaza to deter Israel from any further activities against Iran.
And I think then the last point that I would make is that I think the deterrence is one question, but distraction is the other. That is,
distraction and deterrence
is right now the time when Israel and the United States and everyone is focused on what's going on inside Israel and inside Gaza. Is this a time when Iran makes some dramatic step, and presents some sort of a nuclear fait accompli or something like that? I don't know the answer, but it's certainly something that I don't think we can rule out.
That's a great point, and it just brings me back to my main concern, which is the framework in which the U.S. has been approaching Iran under the Biden administration. So the resurrection of the Obama policy, which is to seek understandings with Iran, and to release frozen assets in the process, to do absolutely nothing to try to curtail the development of Iran's disruptive military capacities, and to do really nothing to prevent Iran from getting a nuclear weapon. All of this is having the effect, in general, of giving Iran a playground to play in without any retribution, and also simply to strengthen it in general. And if we continue to say, oh, the problem here is between the Palestinians and the Israelis, and we have to have a peace process and negotiate between them, and we take all of the attention away from what's happening in the Persian Gulf, then we will be losing the Middle East eventually. This will be terrible for Israel, but it'll be terrible for the United States as well. Okay,
Mike, if I may.
Yes, you can have, unless Jonathan says he wants to say something, you actually do get the last word, and I won't make any more soliloquies.
No, I think just to capitalize on what Jonathan said, and then you have rightfully pointed out, is there are two different incidents all revolve around the same thing: the Lebanese Hezbollah involvement and the Iranian nuclear program. It all boils down to my dark world of military affairs. We have a term borrowed from physics, the center of gravity. Had we shooted this upload with the same team, and I asked Jonathan, let's say 1 week ago, 2 weeks ago, what is the #1 national security priority of the state of Israel 1 week ago. And what is the first intelligence briefing that the Israeli prime minister is getting on the morning in terms of regional security? Probably the Iranian nuclear program and the prospects of Iran going nuclear would be right before the breakfast and the coffee of the Israeli prime minister. Now it is Hamas. And this is the opportunity cost in economy terms, to borrow it from another field. This is the having an intelligence briefing between breakfast and coffee about Hamas and the Hamas military capabilities is your opportunity cost for not having that intelligence briefing about the Iranian nuclear program. That's one thing. And the second thing, and it distracts the center of gravity of your intelligence paradigm, intelligence calculus. The same goes for Lebanese Hezbollah. By Lebanese Hezbollah, militarily and only militarily speaking, we do not necessarily mean Lebanese Hezbollah combat formations, pouring into the Israeli border and dragging the Israeli brigades into an open-ended fight. Only a military buildup and sporadic rocket and drone launches would tie down a large proportion of the Israeli defense forces in the northern frontier, and that would have an indirect effect in the fourth generation calculations in the south, in Gaza Strip, or in Gaza Strip campaign. So the thing is, the Lebanese Hezbollah involvement here, I think its major aim could be distracting the center of gravity of the Israeli defense forces, and they can do that without even firing one single bullet, just by a build-up and just by political military signaling.
Okay, with that, we'll bring this to a close. Thank you, gentlemen, for what's been a very informative session about a very, very grim set of events. Needless to say, our hearts go out to all of the Israelis who've lost friends and loved ones, and to all of the Israelis who's going to see their loved ones go into battle. And we wish them all the best and Godspeed.